Hello, everybody. It's lovely to see you. Well, not literally, I can't see you, but it's nice to know you're out there. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today to talk about my new book, Flatten Your Curve. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Janine Tate. I'm a beauty therapist and a nutritionist, and also the founder of Bestow Beauty, which is a wellness brand that focuses on treating the skin from within using nutritionally rich formulations. So, as ever, if you have any questions during this webinar, please send them through on the chat. The team's there waiting to answer any of your queries. So, my new book, Flatten Your Curve, it's a guide to stabilizing your blood sugar, and this leads to more beautiful skin, a healthier body, and happy hormones. So, what exactly is blood sugar? Well, if I'm being quite accurate, it's actually blood glucose, because the substance that circulates in our blood to supply our cells with fuel is actually a simpler version of the table sugar that you'll be very familiar with, that we add to food to sweeten it. And it's very vital, this blood glucose. It fuels every cell in our body. So, from our skin cells to our heart cells, right through to our brain cells, every cell in our body uses that glucose to fuel its metabolism, and it's actually vital for life. So, without it, we wouldn't be able to survive. And you know yourself, if you've ever got very low with your blood glucose, you'll feel quite tired, quite faint, you can be shaky, and you can even feel quite dizzy. And if that went on and your blood sugar dropped even lower, you would actually lose consciousness. So it's incredibly important. And I'm sure you're all very aware of that. However, what you might not know is that glucose is also highly unstable and can damage the cells in our body and our tissues. So you could imagine it's like nuclear energy, a lovely clean energy that gives you lots of power, but it has a dark side, and that's what glucose is like. So this means that our body is very focused on controlling the amount of glucose in our blood at all times. And the average person, the total amount of glucose that's circulating in your blood at any one moment in time equals about a teaspoon. So it's a very tiny amount. And as I say, the body is tightly regulating that. And when it drops too low, the liver will keep drip feeding it into the blood to maintain those levels to fuel our cells. But equally, when it gets too high, usually after we've eaten, and glucose floods into our blood from our food, then our body will work very hard to bring that level back down within a safe range again. So it does that by releasing a hormone called insulin from the pancreas, and insulin quickly encourages the body to take all of that excess glucose out of the blood and store it safely away so that we can access it in the future when we need it, but it's not going to cause any trouble with being too high in the blood. And it'll store it in two ways. Very short-term storage is glycogen, and so our liver stores lots of glycogen, and that's how it's able to release glucose continuously into the blood. And then if you don't use that glycogen, it is stored as fat. So a lot of our fat cells come from, or the fat in our fat cells come from our glucose that has been excess to requirements. So that is what blood glucose is. Now, what happens is if it gets too high, so what we're wanting with our body is for our blood levels to be quite stable. And of course, they'll go up when we eat, but they should resemble lovely rolling hills. Whereas what happens is if we eat foods like refined carbohydrates and sugar, then that blood glucose increases very quickly, and you get very sharp, like pointy mountains and deep valleys rather than those beautiful rolling hills. So it depends on the types of foods that you eat. If you eat proteins and fats, these don't contain glucose, so they don't tend to increase your blood glucose, whereas carbohydrates, depending on the type, will always release glucose into your blood, but how quickly it does it will depend on the type of carbohydrates you've eaten. So if you eat sugar and refined carbohydrates, you get a very fast, influx of glucose and you get the pointy mountains, the spikes, glucose spikes. Whereas if you eat more whole foods and whole grains, you tend to get softer rolling hills, and that's what we're wanting. Unfortunately, as time goes on, and certainly with our modern diets and our modern lifestyles, our glucose control can become harder. And that's what happened to me. You're not even aware that it's happening because often you don't associate the symptoms you're getting with it being your blood glucose. And it wasn't until I went and saw the doctor for a routine checkup and he was checking my blood test that I just had done. And he said, look, everything's looking really good, Janine. And I was like, yes, I work hard on my health. That's what I was hoping for. But then he added, your blood glucose is on the highest side of normal, however, and you should watch that. And it wasn't until I went home and had a look and did some research that I discovered that if I'd even been 1 point higher, I would have entered into the pre-diabetic zone. So that gave me a real fright. And actually, I was really annoyed with my body because I don't actually eat sugar. So I was really surprised and a little bit peeved off. So I wallowed in self-pity for a couple of weeks, as you do, and then I do what I always do when I'm faced with a challenge. I start to research relentlessly. A little OCD on that, I must say. And I discovered lots of really interesting things about blood glucose. And one of the first things I discovered was a continuous glucose monitor. So this is a continuous glucose monitor that you can order online. You don't need a prescription. They last about 10 days and you insert them into your arm. I actually usually insert a little higher in on the back of my arm, that nice fatty little area there, and it's easy to hide with your clothes. And what that does is it measures your glucose in your blood every 5 minutes and it sends the results to an app on your phone. So here you can see this was a classic. I've screenshotted it and I'm not wearing one at the moment. So the screenshot I've got, it's only ever when I've got a spike that I take a screenshot just so I can relate it to what I've eaten and it reminds me. So as you can see here for lunch, it didn't really suit me. So they're a bit too many refined carbohydrates in that lunch for me. Whereas the rest of the day, you can see nice rolling hills. So that was really just such an eye-opener to be able to peek under the hood and see what was happening in my body. And what I discovered from this was that there were a lot of foods that I was eating that didn't contain sugar, but they were giving me the same sort of spikes as if they did contain sugar. So things like a classic one, and one of the worst for me, is sourdough. So I didn't think that that would be a bad food for me. I'd get lovely, good quality sourdough, but it would spike me as badly as sugar. But there were lots of foods like that that I thought were healthy, like sushi and ramen, that gave me terrible spikes. So that's where my blood sugar problem was coming from, foods that I didn't think were causing me a problem. And so I started eating using my continuous glucose monitor to try and even out those levels again. So I started eating food, different food, and I started eating it differently. And this helped hugely. But what really surprised me was that a lot of symptoms that I'd developed over the years that I never thought were connected all disappeared. And I realized that they were all connected by being associated with blood sugar. So the types of things that I noticed was within about 2 weeks, I lost the little kilo or two I was holding around my tummy. I found that I was getting periods of tiredness just out of the blue in the middle of the day, and I found that disappeared. I'd not often, but I would get cravings. I'd kill for a bag of potato chips. That disappeared. I'm well known for getting hangry if I don't get fed. So that also luckily disappeared. And all sorts of things, my mood evened out. And I was amazed that it was all related to my blood glucose. And that's when I decided to write a book about it, because I was so fascinated by the fact that this can really be impacting on the quality of our life. So let's have a look at some of the common symptoms that you may be experiencing that could be related to blood glucose levels being unregulated. So the first one is weight gain. As I mentioned, When glucose goes up in your blood, insulin also goes up. And insulin is the storage hormone. So you cannot burn fat when you have high insulin levels in your blood. So basically, if you've got glucose going up and down all day, your insulin will be doing the same, and it makes it impossible for you to access those fat stores. So that can be a common problem, especially around the midsection. It's that annoying weight that it doesn't matter how little you eat or how much you exercise, it doesn't seem to shift. This can be related to your blood glucose. Hormonal imbalances, not only can your blood glucose affect your hormones like your estrogen and your androgens, but also your sex hormones can affect your ability to manage blood glucose. So what happens for a lot of women in the second half of their cycle, when progesterone is high, it makes it harder. We become more insulin resistant. So it can make us more prone to cravings and constant hunger, wanting to snack all the time. Equally, if you have unregulated blood glucose, that affects your insulin levels, and that knocks on to affect and unbalance your sex hormones. So a lot of hormonal imbalances can be traced back to a problem with your blood glucose. And that's definitely in the case of PCOS. You see people who have PCOS also have insulin resistance and blood glucose problems as well. Another interesting thing is menopausal symptoms like hot flushes and night sweats. They've done a study and found that that can also be worsened by problems with blood glucose. Cravings, definitely. So when you get a blood sugar spike, you will get a crash following that, and that's when we go into the craving state. Our body wants to get glucose straight away, and it will ask for it in the form of sugar. So you'll get that kind of craving. Luckily, it only lasts about 20 minutes, so if you can wait it out, you can usually, or at least have a healthy snack, it can break the cycle. Constant hunger. So this is an interesting one. Our bodies should be like hybrid cars. We have two forms of fuel, fat and glucose, and our bodies should be able to swap backwards and forwards between the two of them. So when we haven't eaten for a while, we should be able to go into fat burning mode. But what happens is when we become a little bit addicted to carbohydrates all the time, especially the refined carbohydrates, we can lose that ability to flip into our fat burning phase, and we stay in that sugar burning. And so in that case, it means that we have to constantly fuel ourselves. So if you have constant hunger, or you've always feel like you have to have a snack in your bag to keep you going, this can mean you've lost that ability to be metabolically flexible, and you've turned into a bit more of a petrol kind of car rather than a hybrid. Mood swings is another one. A friend of mine gets very affected by this. I remember her telling me how she was having a really good day at work, really enjoying her day. And next minute she noticed that she was feeling really discontent, wondering what she was doing in this job, what she was doing with her life. And then she realized that her mood had changed after having a scone for morning tea. So just check, that can be a problem too. And there's a lot of research showing that blood glucose problems can be linked to anxiety and to feeling low as well. And that's another thing that disappeared for me, is I always used to have this low level of anxiety all the time, and I feel like that is gone now that I've stabilized my blood glucose. So I can definitely relate to that one. Tiredness is another thing that I was suffering from too, and this can affect you both on the blood glucose spikes and the crashes. So when you get the spikes, which you'd think is giving you lots of energy, it can overwhelm the little power centers of our cells, the little mitochondria. They're stuffed with so much glucose they can't function. So you can get tired both when you've got too much glucose and definitely when you've got too little. And this tiredness just comes over you very quickly, and you just feel like you could curl up and have a nap. Brain fog is another common problem, and as you'll see later on, blood glucose problems can be associated long term with dementia and Alzheimer's and conditions like that. Poor sleep, so this is a common one. And it goes both ways. If you have a poor night's sleep, you'll find your glucose control the next day is much harder. But equally, if you find that you easily go off to sleep and then you wake up in the middle of the night feeling really wired, what that can be is going to bed on a glucose spike. And then when you get the subsequent crash, your body wakes you up. It's like I think there's a word for it, adrenaline alert. So it's like the body thinks, oh, my blood sugar's too low. And even though it will very quickly come up and stabilize, it's too late. It's woken you, and now you have to try and get back to sleep. Gut health issues, definitely. So by having a lot of refined carbohydrates and sugars in our diet, we tend to favor the sugar-loving microbes over the fiber-eating microbes. And so this leads to all sorts of health problems and immunity problems. And lastly, inflammation, because of course glucose is very unstable and damages our tissues and our cells, and so that can set up inflammation. And the problem there is a lot of our chronic diseases are driven by inflammation. Let's now look at what unstable glucose levels can do to our skin. So of course, the first one is the inflammation, as we just discussed. That's definitely going to affect our skin. So increased redness, it's going to worsen conditions like rosacea. So there's research showing that rosacea for some people can be linked to their blood glucose. And of course, flare-ups of skin disorders. So any skin disorder that is red and inflamed can get worse with that unstable blood glucose. Unbalanced hormones, of course, because insulin very directly affects our estrogen and androgens. And of course, one thing it can do is give the androgens the upper hand, which tends to make our skin more oily and us more prone to congestion and to breakouts. So a lot of acne can be related to that blood glucose. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to the fact that after a sugar-heavy weekend, they can often find their skin is a little bit more prone to breaking out. And the last one, of course, is glycation. So glycation is, of course, related to glucose. Glucose oxidizes and attaches to our collagen fibers, and then it causes them to become more twisted and matted, and they lose their elasticity, and it shows up as lines on the skin, wrinkles on the skin. And there was some interesting research done in Sweden showing that people who have less glucose control tend to look older than people who have really good glucose control. So that's interesting too. And then, of course, these are the everyday symptoms that we can experience, but of course, there are long-term health risks as well. We can eventually become insulin resistant. So too many glucose peaks and too much insulin being released, after a while, our bodies and our cells get tired and stop listening to the insulin message. So we can start becoming resistant to that insulin, and our bodies aren't as effective at pulling that glucose out and storing it safely where it can't do any damage. That, of course, can lead to type 2 diabetes. Heart disease can be linked with unstable blood glucose. So is dementia. So they're starting to think that even calling dementia and Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. That doesn't mean it's a different type of diabetes. It is actually type 2 diabetes, but they're just wanting to emphasize the fact that insulin resistance and those blood sugar spikes, how damaging they can be to our brain health. And of course, cancer as well. Cancer cells love glucose. So interestingly, this is just a small number of the long-term risks. I listened to a podcast of a doctor who specializes in blood glucose, and she says that 9 out of 10 of the leading causes of death can be traced back in some way to your blood glucose levels. So that's a little scary. So that brings me to the answer to this, and that is my new book, the Flatten Your Curve book. And this book is divided into 3 sections. The first section is the understanding the science. So it's all the biology of how the body deals with your blood glucose. And so if you love learning about how your body works, you'll really enjoy this section. I've written in very easy to read plain English, so that you'll be able to understand how our amazing body controls a substance like glucose, which is so vital but can be so damaging. The next section in the book is all the little hacks, because you don't have to give up all the foods that are spiking you. You can find ways around reducing their impact. So things like, for instance, say I wanted to have a high carbohydrate meal like pasta, for instance. What I would do is I would start with a green salad with a French dressing. And what that does is gives me lots of fiber, and the fiber turns into a gooey substance which lines the digestive tract and slows down the absorption of sugar. The French dressing has vinegar in it, which slows down the emptying of the stomach, so slows down the rate at which the glucose enters the blood. And of course, it contains oil, and fats also lower that glucose spike. Then I would have my protein as well. So whether that's chicken or fish or red meat or whatever the protein was going to be, I would eat that next, and then the pasta last. And then afterwards, I would go for a walk, because your muscles just act like glucose sinks. They just suck up all of that excess glucose from the blood. So there's little hacks like that, the order in which you eat the food, some lifestyle tips on how you can eat your favorite foods but reduce the impact on your body and help your body deal with that glucose spike. And then the last section, we have over 80 different recipes. And these recipes, each one has a beautiful photograph, and we've tested them all out. I've tested them, and as you know, I'm not well known for my cooking skills. So if I can make them, anyone can make them. They're very simple to make. And it's a little bit different than what we've done in the past with our books. We haven't got loads of salad recipes or anything like that, because salad actually won't cause a problem with your blood glucose. In fact, our traditional meal of meat and 3 veg, as long as you're not having lots of potatoes and starchy vegetables, is not going to have any problem at all or create any problem at all with your blood glucose. It's things like your pasta and your sushi and your pizzas and your breads and your cakes and your desserts and things like that, your snacks often. They're the ones that cause the problems. So this book very much focuses on good solutions for that, things that are going to make it much easier for your body to deal with those carbohydrates. And as I say, over 80 different recipes, predominantly gluten-free. There's only 2 recipes in there that contain oat groats, and we have substitutes for those if you are a celiac. So it's a great book, and it's beautifully designed by our own Holly Jones. She's done a beautiful job, so it'll be a book that you'll want to pick up and read, we're hoping. And yeah, it's out now, so I hope you find it a really great tool for yourself and for those therapists out there who are listening, for their clients as well. So I hope that it helps you create the healthiest version of you. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll let you get on with your day. Thank you. Bye.